The Memphis Grizzlies suffered a pretty tough loss on Monday night. Let's console one another, dear listener, dear viewer. I've got the numbers that really cost the Grizzlies the game against the Chicago Bulls. Plus, I'm going to give you some reasons to be positive, folks. It's not all negative Nancy Town over here. And Jay Huff is one of the reasons to be an optimist. He is in Memphis to stay. Let's try to find the good together, shall we? Let's lock in here on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is I, Joe Mullinax, your host for this Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Yes, you heard me correctly. I am your host, DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. My amazing co-host, of course, covering the contest there on the ground, unavailable for this recording, but I'm with you, and hopefully you'll stay with me as we talk all things Grizzlies basketball, at least for 30 minutes or so on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And remember, your favorite podcast, Locked On Grizzlies, now has a newsletter. We're introducing the Locked On Grizzlies daily newsletter, your one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. And start your day with the all-new free Locked On Grizzlies newsletter. Again, we're free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Hopefully you're an everydayer. You check out the show each and every time an episode drops, whether it's DeMichael hosting as he'll be doing close this week, whether it's me hosting as I'm doing today, whether it's both of us together as it will be on the Wednesday edition of the pod. Whatever the case might be, hopefully you are with us each and every time that an episode drops. The Chicago Bulls dropped the Memphis Grizzlies on Monday night, and it was disappointing. It was a tough game for Memphis to lose. As I said in our Locked On Now over on YouTube and on social media on X, it's just one game out of 82. We have to maintain that perspective. I know it is so easy, especially in the social media era, to rise and fall and ebb and flow with each and every game. But the Grizzlies have 78 more of these to go, right? They're 2-2. They are down numerous rotation players in the game against the Bulls. They didn't have John Morant, in addition to Luke Kennard and Vince Williams Jr. and G.G. Jackson. Those things add up. So for Memphis to compete with the likes of Jay Huff, who we'll talk more about later on in the show, depending on your perspective of Jay Huff, getting significant minutes with the Grizzlies winning or competing the way that they did with a, Jake LaRavia 31-minute sighting, Scottie Pippen Jr. playing 31 minutes off the bench. That's pretty shocking, right? LaRavia had a tremendous game for Memphis, at least in terms of scoring the basketball, was a good rebounder, 5 assists. It might have been the best game of Jake LaRavia's career. And yet it wasn't enough, probably in part because LaRavia was being asked to do more than he's normally asked to do. That was certainly true of Scottie Pippen Jr., who, even though he had another double-double, 14 points, 10 assists, he was a minus 17. Scottie Pippen Jr. was in the contest. And that is one of the numbers, as I promised earlier in the program, that cost the Grizzlies the game. I don't want to insinuate that Scottie Pippen Jr. was the only reason, but that minus 17 is 8 worse than the next worst number. And I'll talk about that player and who has that number here momentarily. That's a pretty drastic difference. And it's important to point out because I'm sure somebody in the comments, whether it's on YouTube or an X, whatever the case might be, is going to say, Joe, you can't be serious talking about single game plus minus. It's a flawed statistic, but there's no denying the number that the Grizzlies were 17 points worse with Scottie Pippen Jr. on the floor in this game, and he played 31 minutes, including that large stretch in the third quarter into the fourth when the team really struggled, especially on the defensive end. The next worst was Brandon Clark, and his number that's most disappointing in this contest is 4 rebounds. He only played 13 minutes. He played less time than Jalen Wells. He played less time than Jay Huff, who we'll talk more about at the end of the show. He played less minutes even than Zach Edey. So Clark wasn't on the court long enough to really say it's his fault, but his rebounding numbers were not up to snuff. They just didn't do what he needs to do to be the impactful player that Memphis needs him to be. So Brandon Clark and his 4 rebounds, no steals, no blocks, another major concern. The Grizzlies only had 5 steals in the entire contest, not the best showing for them, to say the least, in that particular area where they try to prioritize defensively so often. So Scottie Pippen Jr., not his best game, at least in terms of plus minus. You had Brandon Clark, who didn't make the impact that you would like to see him make, assuming he's fully healthy. Another number that I didn't like in this game, and it's one that's getting a lot of attention in the Grizzlies sphere, is 24. And that's the amount of minutes that Jaren Jackson Jr. logged in this contest against the Chicago Bulls on Monday night. Now, my co-host, Michael Cole, again, he's of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He asked Taylor Jenkins, the head coach of the Memphis Grizzlies, about this directly. And this is from DeMichael's X account at DeMichaelC. I asked Taylor Jenkins about the minutes distribution today, and this is obviously from yesterday. With Jaren Jackson Jr., he said they're trying to build him back up after the hamstring injury. He added that there were a couple of times he had guys ready to check in, but the defense wasn't getting stops. It sounds like Taylor Jenkins was very mad at his team's defensive efforts in this contest. And don't get me wrong, I would be mad too. But I hope that Taylor Jenkins is able to go home and look at himself in the mirror and ask himself, are we being overly cautious with the likes of Jaren Jackson Jr.? This is game 4, and I realize that Jaren just came back on Saturday, but it's his second game in 3 nights. Jaren Jackson Jr. is 8 years younger than Nikola Vucevic, and Vucevic played a heck of a lot more minutes. I struggle with how this team handles these situations. I'm not saying that you've tried him out there for 36 minutes coming off of the hamstring issue, but there's such a thing as being too protective. And I think that we're flirting with that line. Now, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not an athletic trainer. I don't have those certifications. I'm not going to pretend like I do. But I do have the experience of a lifetime at this point in sports. And different teams handle these things differently. The Grizzlies are notorious, at least in my mind, maybe they're notorious in your mind now too, for doing these sorts of things with players that are injured. Taking their time, slowly ramping them up, except, of course, in the great case of Joe Morant. Jaren Jackson Jr. and others are always treated with kid gloves, and I don't fully understand it. I think that the logic behind it is sound. I want to stress that. But if he can play, and if he's feeling good, these are things that need to be flexible. These are things that need to be malleable. I struggle with why you can't ask in the middle of a game or test at halftime, hey, how are you feeling? Maybe we can increase this a little bit. A little bit more flexibility. The game is falling out of grasp. Maybe we should put Jaren in a little bit sooner, since he is our best player, two-way player, that is eligible to compete in this contest. Thinking about those things and being able to implement them on the fly, that does not seem like a space where the Grizzlies and Taylor Jenkins are comfortable. You go into a game with a plan, that plan has to be able to be adjusted. You find a way to pick up that victory, and then you deal with the ramifications of that afterwards, not in terms of an injury. Obviously, you don't want that. But if he plays more minutes than you wanted him to, maybe you lighten his practice the next day. Or maybe you don't play him in the first leg of a back-to-back. The Grizzlies may wind up doing that anyway. So if he's going to be taking a game off here soon, which the way that they're treating him, it wouldn't surprise me, why are they so hesitant to allow him to play an additional 4 to 6 minutes? That may have made all the difference. Jaren was a plus 15, a team best plus 15 in this game. But he only played 24 minutes. The last number I want to share with you in terms of the reason the Grizzlies lost, and again, it's kind of nullifying my point about Scottie Pippen Jr.'s plus minus, Marcus Smart was a plus 14 in this game, second best on the roster behind only Jaren. Marcus Smart only scored 1 point, and it was on 1 free throw. Marcus was 0 for 8 from beyond the arc, 0 for 11 from the field. Now, there's lots of other things that go into winning basketball games, right? He had 4 stocks, Marcus Smart did, 2 steals, 2 blocks, 7 assists, only 1 turnover. Smart kind of had a Draymond Green kind of showing, to be honest with you, in this game. He impacted competitive game and winning in other ways, but that shot attempt number is too high. I'm not necessarily mad at him for not scoring. I would have liked to have seen him take less shots and let somebody else take those opportunities. But that's okay. Again, Marcus Smart doing things that helped the Grizzlies stay competitive in other spaces. That's safe to say. He and Jaren in particular were a good tandem, at least when they were on the floor, the team was winning those minutes. So those were the big things that stood out to me. Scottie Pippen Jr., the bench in general, struggling, that third quarter group in particular. Jaren Jackson Jr. only playing 24 minutes. That was a struggle for me. Let me know what you guys are thinking, what numbers stand out to you. Maybe you just want to talk about what you saw. A tough loss. In a loaded Western Conference, you have to try to get as many of those kinds of games as you can. They were up by 20 to lose that lead, lose that game at home. That stings, and you hope it doesn't sting too much down the road. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at Gametime. I love basketball. I love football. I even love baseball this time of year. But the thing that I really love to watch live, ladies and gentlemen, is hockey. The chill of the ice, the slam of the boards. I love going and watching my Washington Capitals play, and I think that you would really enjoy going and seeing a hockey game live as well. But even if hockey is not your sport, you want some other sort of event, Gametime Picks with curation really makes it easier to save more money, not just on sporting events, but concerts, comedy shows, theater shows, and so much more. You can toggle on the all-in pricing feature, and it will show you the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Plus, you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy with their seat views option. And you also have the lowest price guarantee from Gametime, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. So those were all negative Nancy numbers, right? Those were all things. Jaren's minutes, Smart's missed buckets, the made threes by the Chicago Bulls, 25 made threes. They shot almost 50% from the field. Lots of things to dislike about Monday night's game against Chicago. But I want to focus on some positivity. I want this to be a space where if you're optimistic coming out of that game, as best you can be, I want to give you your say. And for me, that optimism has to start with Desmond Bane. 30 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, 6 of 10 from beyond the arc, 11 of 19 overall from the field. This is all-star Desmond Bane. This is the guy that I made the bold prediction that he is going to be a most improved player candidate. And Chet Holmgren and others are having really good starts to their year. I certainly don't want to belittle that. But this is the Desmond Bane that I was talking about. This is the guy that I think can really take that leap into all-star game contention. He was the best player for Memphis in this contest. Jaren did some good things, 3 blocks, 1 steal, 6 rebounds in his 24 minutes of play. So it's not like Jaren was a problem. But I just think Bane played his best. He was the player of the game in this game for me. And Bane rising to the challenge when his team needed him certainly was a good thing to see. I loved 13 rebounds from Santi Aldama and 7 assists. Obviously, I would have loved a couple more made threes, 1 for 5 from beyond the arc. That's not ideal. Not his most efficient scoring night that he's had this season, but his game is evolving. He is developing layers to what he is capable of. He is rebounding the ball for a team that desperately needs it. Excuse me, a team that desperately needs it. And as he develops that skill set, that makes him a guy that you can afford to play a team high 35 minutes and he not hurt you, right? He can provide those opportunities to impact winning in other spaces. And those 13 rebounds, team best 13 rebounds, helped the Grizzlies out-rebound the Bulls by 10 in this contest. Rebounding has been something that Michael Cole and I have talked about on this show, how concerned we are about it. That was not the problem in this game. The Grizzlies rebounded well. It was the three-point defense. The fact that Kobe White and Zach LaVine were 10 of 22 from beyond the arc. That's a major concern. The rebounding was not the problem in this particular game, however, and that is a positive. That is a reason to have a good outlook. 5 rebounds, 6 points, 3 of 7 shooting for Zach Edey in this game. I think that's a reason for optimism. Again, he only plays 14 minutes, not foul trouble based this night. They just didn't like the way that he was fitting up the matchup. Maybe they're trying to limit his minutes as he gets comfortable in the NBA. But I thought Edey looked better. Certainly not where he needs to be, but I thought he looked improved. I mentioned Jake LaRavia earlier on in the show. 9 rebounds, 5 assists on 17 points. The assist numbers continue to be reasons for optimism. 37 assists on 51 made buckets. The Grizzlies are moving the ball well. They're being impactful and purposeful with how they are creating these offensive looks. Chicago was better at it in this game because of the defensive lapses by Memphis, especially in that second half. But LaRavia showed the capacity to do a lot of interesting things in and of himself. And I also really liked how that turnover number was lower for Memphis. It was a relatively clean game for both teams in that way. Chicago only had 9 turnovers, Memphis with only 10. The Grizzlies got up 111 shots, that pace idea that we talk a lot about here on Locked On Grizzlies, getting the ball up and down the floor, getting a lot of shot attempts off. That's certainly, they got 11 more shots in this game, Memphis did, than the Bulls. So their ability to get up and down the floor and try to create offense in pace with tempo, that is optimistic, a reason for optimism. 2 more reasons for optimism before we head into the Jay Huff news. And again, as a UVA fan, very excited to talk about Jay Huff being a Memphis Grizzlies member, not just now, but long term. 12 is another important number because it's important to point out that the Grizzlies didn't have their best player in this game. So with Ja Morant out, and maybe they are being overly cautious with him, but again, he is coming off of a preseason injury, much like Jaren Jackson Jr. That's significant, right? Ja does not play in this contest, and Ja goes out on doesn't go out on the court, and this team had a 20-point lead on the Chicago Bulls. Now it fell apart, but the lead also fell apart against the Orlando Magic. You can make an argument that Morant being there helped it stabilize, and maybe he would have done the same here. But the fact remains they were able to build such a competitive advantage without their best player on the floor. When Ja is back more full-time, when they're comfortable, if they're ever comfortable with Ja being in that spot, I think that you are going to see a Grizzlies team that has a lot more room for advancement in the Western Conference, winning streaks and that sort of nature. The last number I want to leave you with in terms of optimism is 78. And that is the literal number of games left in this season. It is October 29th. It is not even November yet, dear listener, dear viewer. It is not even Halloween yet. I have called myself in the past, I've been doing this for a long time now, over a decade covering this team. I have called myself Mr. Call Me a Christmas. Call me a Christmas. I'll start worrying about the state of play for this Memphis team around the holidays. I might need to extend that to Martin Luther King Day this year because of all of the injuries, the fact we won't see Gigi Jackson probably until around that Christmas holiday, hopefully a little bit before. But the significant point of that, the part that matters the most, is there is so much basketball left to be played. They are 2-2 with Ja Morant out for this game. No Gigi Jackson at all. No Vince Williams Jr. at all. No Luke Kennard at all. They are playing guys like Jay Huff. No matter how excited you are about Jay Huff, they don't plan on him, or they haven't planned on him playing these many minutes. They just haven't. It's been a happy accident. Scottie Pippen Jr. logging 31 minutes when he was on a 2-way contract 2 weeks ago. That is not part of the plan. Both Scottie Pippen Jr. and Jay Huff were on 2-way deals. They've advanced, they've improved, they've earned the opportunity that they currently have. But it's not like this team is at full strength yet. And there's a lot of time for that to come into being and be part of reality. So, take a deep breath. Understand that you may disagree with the philosophy. I disagree with it to an extent. I talked about it earlier in the show. I think they're overly cautious with these young athletic players. But they are not changing how they address these things. Trainers can change, apparently, while the mindset remains. It's not the trainer's fault. They're being told to be cautious. They're being told to not worry so much about the here and now. It's about the long stretch of the season and what they think is best for their players, their personnel in this system in Memphis. They have a lot of time to go. It's fair to point out, I've pointed it out myself, that they need every win they can get. When you're up by 20, you should win that basketball game. But life in the NBA is runs. And sometimes those runs finish with you being in the outside of the outcome that you shouldn't have been when the run began. The Grizzlies will be on the opposite end of that, and that will cancel it out at some point. There's rises and falls, peaks and valleys to every season. They're going to have 12 back here soon, and he'll be able to help them get back off the losing schneid. And there's 78 games left to be played. There is a lot of NBA basketball to come. Memphis is going to have opportunities to show their abilities soon enough. Jay Huff. How about Jay Huff? We talked about him a moment ago. He has been a pleasant surprise. The young man out of the University of Virginia. 10 points, 2 rebounds, 2 blocks in this game. Only played 18 minutes. That's still more than Zach Edey, which is mildly concerning. But we'll talk more about that here in a moment. This Jay Huff guy has come along, and he has shown the capacity. I call him a young man. He's 27 years old. He has shown the capacity in his 3rd year as a professional to go out and do things for Memphis that they desperately need. He is a floor spacing big. That is not what Zach Edey is. That is not what Brandon Clark is. That is, to a minor extent, what Jaren Jackson Jr. is, at least theoretically. It definitely is what Santi Aldama can be. He's shown it this season. But as a 5th big, when you look at somebody like Jay Huff, you could certainly do a heck of a lot worse than what he's providing the Grizzlies. 2 of 3 from beyond the arc, somebody that you have to defend or at least honor in terms of spacing. He's more athletic and spry than he gets credit for. A better defender, again, those 2 blocks. He's very smart. He's savvy. He understands the angles of the game. That Tony Bennett defensive system that he played in, I'm sure that pays off in that particular way. He compensates for what he might lack in foot speed. He looks out for those issues before they come. And he has really good timing and an understanding of where he's supposed to be on the floor just about all the time. All that adds up to a guy that, is your 14th or 15th man at the end of the bench. You can do a lot worse than. But the interesting thing about Jay Huff, and I wrote about this over in our team newsletter, make sure you're checking that out, today's edition, Jay Huff's name being put in the long but distinguished list now, Vince Williams Jr., G.G. Jackson, Scottie Pippen Jr., now Jay Huff, of former 2-way contract players that are on full standard deals. Does Jay Huff's emergence make a guy like Brandon Clark more expendable? Because you're not going to move on from Santi Aldama unless you really don't plan on extending him in the future. I think they probably do. They probably want to pay him roughly what they're currently paying Brandon Clark. Jay Huff is a part of the process long term. Jaren Jackson Jr. figures to be part of the process long term. What if Jay Huff is the 4th best big on this Grizzlies roster? He's better than Zach Edey right now, but Zach Edey is being groomed and developed to be a better player than him with his higher ceiling sooner rather than later. So if it's Jaren as your best big, and then it's Edey/Aldama, is Huff your 4th man? And then when G.G. Jackson is healthy, does he become your 4th man? Because you add a Luke Kennard, you add a Vince Williams Jr. back in terms of being healthy. And now you're looking around and you start to see a squeeze. And Brandon Clark makes $12.5 million a year. Is Jay Huff that good yet? Has he done enough to make it look like he can be that type of piece? I don't think so. I think Jay Huff as an end of rotation guy makes a heck of a lot of sense. A break glass in case of emergency. Matchup specific. If you need more spacing, you're not getting enough offensive pop. I think Jay Huff can bring those things for you. I think it's also a case of Jay Huff just looking way better than what he should have looked like to be in the G League. And that is where watching him and Scottie Pippen Jr. in particular, Scottie Pippen Jr. is going to be given every opportunity to be the backup point guard. I don't see as much opportunity for Jay Huff because of the names that I just listed already being on the roster. Once everybody's there, I think Huff is an end of the rotation guy. But Jay Huff was too good for the G League. He helps Memphis in terms of big man depth, especially in that spacing compartment. That matters. That helps guys like John Morant when he's out there on the floor to have as much room to operate as possible. You don't get that with Zach Edey in terms of floor spacing right now. You get it in terms of screen setting. Zach Edey can certainly be that guy. But Huff has layers to his game that other bigs on this roster don't necessarily have. And I mentioned Brandon Clark, and I mentioned in the newsletter, is Clark somebody that you can move on from with a first-round pick and upgrade your wing situation? I think so. It's intriguing to think about those possibilities. And we've only played 4 games. There's 78 to go. I'm not ready to give up on Brandon Clark just yet. But what makes Brandon Clark, or what made Brandon Clark such a great role player, was his ability to leap and leap again, his athleticism. I've talked about it here on Locked On Grizzlies, and I've admitted that I was wrong. Clark looked pretty darn good last spring coming back from that injury. It's very possible it's just a cold stretch at the start of the season. He's trying to find his footing, what his role is going to be on this team. You need a larger sample size to be sure. But if you were concerned about it before, like me, you have a little bit more reason to revisit that worry. Because if Clark is not capable of being the guy that you need him to be, he's a 6'8" center that can't shoot the basketball right now. He doesn't really have a creation component to his game. It's not like Draymond Green out there creating off the dribble, doing direct handoffs. Clark's game was built on something that we're not seeing consistently at this moment. So if we revisit this, again, call me at Christmas, if it's 2 months from now and Clark is not being able to contribute in the way that Memphis needs him to contribute, that is a salary that on a team that maybe is trying to tank, you find a way to bring in a superior upgrade for a Memphis team that shouldn't be trying to tank at that stage of the season. I'll be honest with you, if they're trying to tank in December, it's probably time to move on from Taylor Jenkins. There's a lot of folks calling for that already. Maybe that's a topic for our our Wednesday edition of the podcast when DeMichael is back with me. So kudos to Jay Huff. I'm a big Jay Huff guy. I remember him when he was playing at the University of Virginia. I didn't think he'd be an NBA player, I'll be honest. And that is a credit to him that he has physically put himself in this position. I think Memphis desperately needed a floor spacing big, right? The idea of Jaren Jackson Jr. is nice as a floor spacing big, but he's not really that. Santi Aldama is the best option you have in that space. You needed another body, and Jay Huff has been a able-bodied participant in these Grizzlies games. He certainly was not the issue against the Bulls. It's wonderful to have him in Memphis long-term. Kudos to Jay Huff. Thank you so much for being with me on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is appreciated. I know it's tough after a loss. You want to be mad. You want to yell at the sky. I get it. Nobody likes yelling more than me. You guys know that at this point. But lots of basketball left to be played. The Grizzlies are still not, they're down. They were down 4 rotation players against the Bulls, and they had a big lead. It fell apart. That needs to be fixed. We can talk about ways that can get fixed. I talked about the Taylor Jenkins conversation. I'll talk with my co-host, DeMichael Cole, about that and so much more. His experience watching it live there at FedEx Forum on Monday night. We'll talk about all of that on our Wednesday edition of the show. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Apple, Amazon, YouTube, Spotify, literally anywhere you can get a podcast. Make us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. Remember that we have a podcast newsletter now, the Locked On Grizzlies Daily Newsletter. It's your one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Grizzlies newsletter. Again, we'll be back tomorrow. I can't wait to talk to DeMichael about this game, about the next game, everything that everybody's freaking out about. We're here each and every day. Make sure you're with us to maybe share the freak out experience on the Memphis Grizzlies on this podcast. I'm Joe Mullinax. Thank you again. Make sure you're checking out my work at Grizzlead. I'm a contributor there this year, and make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing. Until next time, we'll catch you later.